So we are beyond the tipping now. We're at that tipping?
I believe we've been, well, on one hand, I believe we're beyond the tipping point of morally, but we are, I believe, at a tipping point of judgment.
Wow. Did you ever lean back in your chair? Ever seen anybody lean back in the chair? And then it just goes back and back, and then all of a sudden,
tip over.
Bam, you're going down. And that's where you say we are in America?
Yeah, I believe, God, listen, we know this. God warns before he judges. I believe, when 9/11 happened, it looked like there was going to be a revival, a national revival, but there was no revival because there was no repentance. There was no connecting. There was no change of course. I believe one of the reasons why the Lord wanted me to write the Harbinger and the Shemitah was to connect it now before the next thing happens, so that when it happens, it will be connected. And so because I believe this is coming, this is, one of the words for Shemitah in Hebrew, one of the meanings can mean the fall. So not just physical falls, collapse, we've seen it, Wall Street, all that, but also the fall. We even see a moral fall, a spiritual fall. One of the key Shemitahs was 1973. During that year, not only do you have you have Vietnam, loss of that, you have many things fall apart, but you also have the legalization of the killing of unborn children. That was a major, if you had to look at the major point of a fall. That's 1973. Well, here we are in 2015, and very shortly the Supreme Court is going to rule on marriage as we know it, That will, if they rule that way, this will be a threshold. This will be a major thing. This has been building for years and years and years. But when this happens, this is a major threshold that we're crossing. And when I spoke in Congress, it was the day after the Supreme Court heard the case. So I had to come to Washington. I came to Washington just as they were hearing that case, the day before. I came there and I saw on the steps of the Supreme Court were people in sackcloth and ashes. And with just standing like witnesses of God, just witnesses of God, that if we cross this threshold, and so at the same time, that's when the Lord gave me the opportunity to give the warning on Capitol Hill. And actually the next day, and this is not, the next day, I always talk about Federal Hall, Washington, in the Harbinger, that Washington gave this warning to America on the first day, which was, the warning was, it was the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. In other words, if America ever turns away from God, disregards his eternal rules of order, turns away, the blessings of God will be removed from the land. It was on the anniversary of that I was in Congress. It was just about that same time that the Supreme Court heard that case. And the next day, on the actual anniversary, April, when Washington gave it, suddenly the Federal Hall where Washington gave it in New York City opened up for me to speak there in that place where Washington gave it and give the warning again in that place. I believe that we are...
Boy, that's a harbinger.
It is. I don't know how these things have all come together, but I believe things are all coming together now. And the warning, if anything, answers to that warning that Washington gave, it is certainly this where America's heading. This, if the Supreme Court rules talk about disregarding the eternal rules of order, when you strike that down, the smiles of heaven will be removed. So I believe we are at a very, very critical point. And one of the things the prophets cry out to America, to Israel, that it says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. And there's a principle that as much as a civilization calls evil good, it will call good evil. So we are watching every time America embraces something against of immorality, at the same time you hear stories about America calling Christians evil, intolerant, haters.
Right.
For what? For simply upholding what everybody upheld before, and now who not joining in the apostasy. And so they are now persecuted. They are driven from their jobs. They are boycotted. They are condemned. This is exactly what happened to Israel when it turned away from God. When they called evil good, they called good evil. So that's why we see the beginning of persecution. One of the ominous things that happened on the day that the Supreme Court heard that case is, I don't know if you know, that the Supreme Court Justice Alto speaks to the White House attorney, and he says, okay, if the definition of marriage is struck down, what will happen? What will the government do with all the religious schools that uphold marriage as such? And now you think that, the politically correct thing to do, they've been briefed on it. The White House has gone over with the attorney if they ask this, so they know exactly what they're saying. And they had to be ready for that question. So you think they said, well, we don't know. Who can say, or nothing's really going to happen. What he answers is, instead of saying no, he said, well, I can't tell you that won't be an issue. Then he says, it will definitely be an issue. In other words, listen, this is very important. if the definition of marriage is struck down, it's not just about marriage. What it means is every Christian school that upholds, people are saying, well, take my children out of the public school, put them in a Christian, that upholds marriage, that doesn't agree with this, their tax exemption will be stripped by the state. By the state. And they've had a precedent because they did this when there was a racial thing. They said that we can't support this, so they'll say this is hate now. So they will strip now what that will mean is that every school, number one, no funding, also they will have to pay, some of them are just on the edge, they can be driven out. So, also, anybody who contributes to them will no longer have tax exemption. That's step number one. But if they do that, they're certainly then going to go after ministries. If you don't agree with this, you are a hate group, we cannot fund you by giving you a tax exemption, so they will strip away tax exemption of ministries. The final thing will be churches. So we are watching the beginning of full-scale persecution, the marginalization of Christians. And so what happens is, if you mainstream immorality, you will drive believers' righteousness to the margins. And so that is what is happening right now.